The execution square reeked of blood and fear, a scent so familiar to the Omegas of the Stormclaw Kingdom that they barely flinched anymore when the iron gates creaked open each dawn. Elara pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the healer's quarters, her hands trembling as she ground herbs that would never be enough to save the souls marked for death today. Through the narrow window, she watched as guards dragged 3 Omegas toward the platform, where Alpha King Kalen Stormclaw himself stood, his massive form silhouetted against the rising sun like a monument to brutality. His reputation preceded him in whispers and nightmares. They called him the Ruthless King, the Alpha who had crushed 17 rebellions in his 12-year reign, who had personally executed his own cousin for suggesting Omegas deserved basic rights, who signed death warrants with the same casual indifference others used to approve grain shipments. Elara had witnessed 6 of those executions herself, each, one carving deeper scars into her soul, each one reinforcing the iron wall she had built around her heart. Her parents had died in his purges 8 years ago, accused of harboring rebel sympathies because her father dared to teach Omega children to read. Her younger brother had vanished into the labor camps 3 years later. She survived by becoming invisible, by mastering the art of healing in silence, by swallowing her rage until it became a cold, patient thing that waited for the right moment to strike. Today's condemned were accused of theft, of stealing bread from a noble's estate to feed their starving families. The punishment for such crimes was always the same under Kalen's law. No mercy, no exceptions, no room for the weakness of compassion. Elara forced herself to watch as the king raised his hand, as the executioner's blade fell with mechanical precision, as 3 more lives were extinguished to maintain the order he believed kept the kingdom strong. She memorized the scene, adding it to the catalog of horrors she carried, fuel for the day when justice might finally come. The crowd dispersed in terrified silence, and Elara turned back to her herbs, her jaw clenched so tightly her teeth ached. She would not cry. She had no tears left for a world this broken. But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the numbness and the careful control, a small flame of defiance refused to die. It whispered that this could not last forever, that even the mightiest tyrants eventually fell, that perhaps she would live to see the day when Omegas no longer had to hide their children from the king's justice. If you are watching this story unfold and feeling the weight of Elara's pain, make sure you hit that like button, because this journey is just beginning, and what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about power, redemption, and the price of freedom. The conspiracy within the palace had been brewing for months, invisible to the king who believed his iron grip on power made him invincible. Lord Darius Blackthorn, Kalen's younger half-brother and commander of the Eastern armies, had spent years carefully cultivating allies among the noble families who resented being ruled by an alpha whose brutality made trade difficult and whose paranoia stifled their own ambitions. High Counselor Marin, who smiled and bowed in the throne room each morning, had been funneling gold to mercenaries and dark mages who promised to deliver what conventional warfare could not. They called their plan the Crimson Eclipse, a coordinated strike that would eliminate Kalen during the Festival of the Wolf Moon, when tradition demanded the king fight exhibition matches against his strongest warriors to demonstrate his dominance. The poison they had acquired was legendary, brewed from shadow root, and woven with spells that would bypass even an alpha's supernatural healing, leaving him weak enough for a killing blow that would look like an honorable death in combat. What they had not anticipated was that Kalen's personal guard, Captain Theron, had discovered fragments of their plot 2 days before the festival. Theron was one of the few men the king trusted, a warrior who had served since Kalen first took the throne, and his loyalty was absolute not because of fear, but because he had witnessed what the king survived to become who he was. The festival arrived with the usual pageantry, banners streaming from every tower, the great arena filled with thousands who came to witness their king's strength. Kalen fought 3 matches that afternoon, his movements a brutal poetry of controlled violence that left his opponents bloodied but alive, a calculated display meant to remind everyone why challenging him was futile. Between the 3rd and 4th match, as he drank from a ceremonial cup presented by High Counselor Marin herself, Captain Theron lunged forward and struck the cup from his hand, shouting a warning that was drowned by the roar of the confused crowd. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards loyal to Darius flooded the arena floor, while Marin's hired mages unleashed spells that turned the celebration into a massacre. Kalen, already feeling the poison's effects spreading through his veins like liquid fire, fought with the desperation of a cornered predator. He killed 7 attackers before his legs gave out, before the world tilted and darkness swallowed him whole. The last thing he saw was Theron's face, blood streaming from a sword wound, screaming orders to the loyal guards to get the king out, to protect the escape route, to hold the line no matter the cost. They carried Kalen's unconscious body through secret passages beneath the palace, passages known only to the royal bloodline and their most trusted protectors. The poison should have killed him within minutes, but his alpha constitution fought against it with stubborn resilience, keeping him suspended in a coma that the healers could not break. For 3 weeks he lay in a hidden stronghold in the northern mountains, guarded by the handful of soldiers who remained loyal, while Darius declared himself regent and began systematically hunting down anyone suspected of supporting the true king. The kingdom descended into controlled chaos as the new regime tightened its grip, executing suspected loyalists and implementing even harsher laws that made Kalen's rule look merciful by comparison. Darius revealed his true nature quickly, a man whose cruelty stemmed not from a twisted sense of order, but from pure sadistic pleasure in wielding power over the helpless. He ordered random selections of Omegas to be taken from their homes for his personal amusement, burned villages that did not meet impossible taxation quotas, and publicly tortured anyone who whispered questions about the king's fate. The kingdom learned too late that there were worse things than a ruthless king who believed in brutal order. There were monsters who enjoyed the suffering itself. Alara knew nothing of palace conspiracies or royal survival when the soldiers came to the orphanage where she had been secretly treating sick children. She had been careful, so careful, always covering her tracks, always moving before patterns could be noticed. But someone had talked, perhaps under torture, perhaps for the reward Darius offered for information about illegal Omega gatherings. She was dragging 2 fevered children toward a hidden cellar when the doors exploded inward and guards in blackthorn colors flooded the building. The children scattered like frightened birds, and Alara threw herself at the nearest soldier, not with any hope of victory, but simply to buy seconds for the little ones to escape. She fought with the fury of every loss she had endured, every injustice she had witnessed, every moment of helpless rage that had accumulated over years of surviving in silence. It was not enough. They overwhelmed her quickly, binding her hands and throwing her into a wagon already crowded with other captured Omegas, most of them healers and teachers, the educated ones Darius wanted to break as examples. The journey to the palace took 2 days, during which Alara learned from whispered conversations that the kingdom believed Alpha King Kalen was dead, that his brother now ruled, and that things had somehow gotten worse than anyone imagined possible. She was thrown into a cell deep beneath the palace, a stone room barely large enough to lie down in, with no light except what filtered through a gap under the iron door. Hours blended into days as she waited for whatever fate Darius had planned, listening to the screams echoing from other cells, steeling herself for the pain she knew was coming. But before the interrogators arrived, everything changed. Captain Theron, barely recovered from his own wounds, made a desperate gamble. He had heard rumors that Darius planned to consolidate power by executing all captured healers in a grand public ceremony, and he knew that among those healers might be someone with knowledge that could save the king who still clung to life in the hidden stronghold. With a handful of loyal soldiers, he staged a lightning raid on the dungeons, fighting through guards who were unprepared for an attack from within the palace itself. They freed 15 prisoners that night, before the alarm truly caught up with them, dragging the confused and terrified Omegas through passages that reeked of blood and smoke, not explaining anything except that they needed to run and trust that this was their only chance at survival. Alara found herself in a freezing mountain stronghold 3 days later, still not understanding why she had been rescued or what these loyalists wanted from her. The truth revealed itself when Theron brought her to a chamber where the Alpha King himself lay on a rough cot, his skin gray and slicked with fevered sweat, his breathing shallow and labored. The poison had not killed him, but it had not released him either, and every healer they had consulted said there was nothing more to be done except wait for either recovery or death. Theron explained with desperate urgency that they needed someone with deep knowledge of toxic magic, someone who might see what others had missed, someone willing to try anything because the alternative was watching the kingdom tear itself apart under Darius's reign. Ilara stared at the man who had destroyed her life, who had killed her parents and condemned her brother to slavery, who had turned her entire existence into a nightmare of fear and loss. Every instinct screamed to let him die, to walk away and let justice take its natural course. But Theron's next words stopped her cold. Under Darius, he said, the death count in 3 weeks had already exceeded everything Kaelin had done in 3 years. Villages were burning. Children were starving. The kingdom was being systematically destroyed not for order but for one man's pleasure. And if Kaelin died, there would be no legitimate challenger to stop it. She demanded time to think, which Theron granted with visible reluctance, leaving her alone in the chamber with the unconscious king. Ilara approached the cot slowly, her healer's instincts warring with her hatred. Up close, she could see details invisible from the execution square, the scars that covered his arms and chest, some old and some fresh, the way his hands twitched as if fighting invisible enemies even, in unconsciousness. The fine tremor in his jaw that spoke of pain, even sleep, could not escape. She placed her hand on his forehead to check his temperature, a purely clinical gesture, and the moment her skin touched his, the world exploded into sensation. The mate bond crashed into her awareness like a tidal wave, ancient and undeniable, screaming that this man was hers, that they were 2 halves of a destined whole, that her soul recognized his despite everything her mind knew about his crimes. Ilara jerked back as if burned, her heart hammering with fury and denial. No, absolutely not. The universe could not be this cruel, could not bind her to the monster who had destroyed everything she loved. She would reject it, refuse it, sever it if such a thing was possible. But even as she stood there shaking with rage, she felt it, the pull, the connection, the wrongness of walking away from someone who was, against all reason and justice, meant to be hers. The choice she made in that moment would change everything. Not because she accepted the bond. She did not. She rejected it with every fiber of her being. But because she was, above all else, a healer, and she could not watch anyone die from poison when she had the knowledge to save them, even if that person deserved death 1,000 times over. She told Theron she would do what she could, not for Kaelin, but for the kingdom that was suffering under Darius's rule, for the Omegas who needed the devil they knew to defeat the devil, who was worse. She worked for 3 days straight, brewing antidotes and weaving counterspells drawn from ancient texts her mother had taught her in secret, texts that carried the old magic of Omega bloodlines from before the purges. The magic responded to her touch with a power that shocked her, flowing through her hands with an intensity she had never experienced, as if the mate bond itself was amplifying her abilities whether she wanted it or not. On the 4th day, as dawn broke over the mountains, Kaelin's eyes opened for the first time in nearly a month, his gaze, sharp and alert despite his weakened state, locked onto Ilara immediately, and she watched awareness flood his features as he felt the bond snap into place from his end. The recognition in his eyes was instant and absolute. He knew what she was to him, knew it with the same certainty she had felt, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other across an impossible divide of pain and destiny. His first words were not what she expected, not a command or a question, but a simple statement delivered in a voice rough from disuse. "You saved me." It was not gratitude exactly, more an acknowledgement of a debt incurred. Ilara's response came cold and clear. "I saved the kingdom from your brother. You are simply the weapon I have chosen to wield. Do not mistake necessity for forgiveness, Alpha King. I know what you are and what you have done. And when this is over, If you survive what is coming, I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you face justice for your crimes. The bond between us means nothing except that fate has a twisted sense of humor. Kalen absorbed this without flinching, his expression unreadable. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He nodded slowly and said, "Fair enough. When Darius is dealt with and the kingdom is stable, if you want my head for what I have done, you will have first claim to it. But right now, I need to know everything that happened while I was unconscious, and I need to plan how to take back my throne from a brother who apparently wants it badly enough to poison and betray me. Comment below what you think Alara should do, because this is just the beginning of an impossible partnership, and the choices she makes next will determine whether redemption is even possible for a king who has caused so much suffering." The strategy sessions that followed were brutal exercises in pragmatism overriding emotion. Kalen's loyal forces numbered barely 200 soldiers against Darius's control of the entire royal army. They had no legal authority since Darius had declared himself regent with the High Council's backing, meaning any move Kalen made would technically be rebellion against the established government. Their only advantages were surprise, knowledge of the palace's secret passages, and the fact that Darius believed his brother was dead. Kalen, still weak from the poison, but recovering with the stubborn resilience that had kept him alive this long, outlined a plan that was audacious to the point of insanity. They would infiltrate the palace during the upcoming regent's coronation, the ceremony where Darius planned to officially crown himself king. They would strike during the moment of maximum visibility, exposing the conspiracy in front of the assembled nobles and foreign dignitaries, using the old laws that said a false regent could be challenged by royal blood if the true heir still lived. It was a gamble that could end in all their deaths if they failed. But Theron and the other loyalists agreed there was no better option. They had 1 week to prepare. Alara found herself drawn deeper into the planning, despite her determination to remain emotionally detached. Her knowledge of the palace layout, gained from years of secretly moving through servant passages to reach Omegas who needed healing, proved invaluable. She mapped routes that Theron's soldiers did not know existed, identified weak points in the new guard rotations, and explained which servants might be sympathetic to their cause. Kalen watched her during these sessions with an intensity that made her skin prickle, but he never mentioned the bond, never pushed for anything beyond the tactical cooperation their situation demanded. She hated that she noticed details about him that complicated her carefully maintained hatred. The way he listened when people spoke, truly listened, processing information with a strategic mind that had kept a fractious kingdom together through sheer force of will and brutal efficiency. The way he deferred to Theron's expertise on military matters and to Alara's knowledge of palace logistics without his ego getting in the way. The scars on his back that she glimpsed once when he was changing bandages. Scars that looked like they came from whips, from torture, from something that happened long before he became king. One night, unable to sleep, she found him alone in the Stronghold's small library, surrounded by old law books and historical texts. She should have left, should have maintained her distance. But something made her ask the question that had been burning in her mind. Why did you become this? The monster who kills Omegas for wanting to feed their children, who crushes any hint of dissent with overwhelming violence, who made fear the foundation of your rule. You clearly have a mind capable of strategy and nuance, so why choose brutality as your only tool? Kalen looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something besides controlled authority in his eyes, something tired and old, despite his relatively young age. He was silent for so long, she thought he would not answer. Then he closed the book he had been reading and spoke quietly. When I was 16, my father, the previous king, was assassinated by a coalition of nobles who wanted a weaker ruler they could control. They killed him in front of me, made me watch as they tore him apart. Then they came for me. But my mother, an Omega from a minor bloodline, threw herself between me and their swords. She died buying me enough time to escape. I spent 2 years in hiding, learning that kindness was weakness, that mercy was a luxury that got good people killed, that the only way to hold power in a kingdom full of predators was to be the most terrifying predator of all. He continued, his voice devoid of self-pity, but heavy with something that might have been regret. When I finally gathered enough support to take Back the throne. I did so by being exactly what those nobles feared most. I executed every conspirator and their families, crushed every house that opposed me, and built a reputation so terrifying that no one would dare attempt what they did to my father. The purges, the executions, the brutal laws, they were never about cruelty for its own sake. They were about creating a kingdom so afraid of chaos that rebellion became unthinkable. I thought I was building stability, creating a structure, strong enough to outlast any internal threat. What I actually built was a cage that trapped everyone, including myself. Alara felt her carefully constructed hatred waver, just slightly, at the raw honesty in his words. "That does not excuse what you did," she said firmly. "Understanding your reasons does not erase the suffering you caused. My parents died because of your paranoia. My brother disappeared into your camps. Thousands of Omegas live in terror because you decided fear was the answer. You became exactly what you claimed to be fighting against, a tyrant who uses violence to maintain control." Kaelin nodded slowly, not arguing. "You are right. I became the monster I swore to destroy. I told myself it was necessary, that the alternative was chaos, that a brutal peace was better than kind anarchy. But the truth is simpler and more damning. I was afraid. Afraid that if I showed any weakness, any mercy, the vultures would descend again, and everything my mother died for would be lost. So I doubled down on the only thing I knew worked: fear. And in doing so, I created a kingdom where justice died and tyranny wore the crown. If we survive what is coming, if I somehow reclaim the throne from Darius, I do not know if I can be anything different. Fear is all I know how to use." The vulnerability in those words was more shocking than any violence Alara had witnessed. This was not a justification or an excuse. It was a confession from a man who recognized his own monstrosity, but did not know how to escape it. She found herself responding before she could stop herself. "Then you will have to learn. Because if you take back that throne and simply return to what you were, I will kill you myself, mate bond or no mate bond. The kingdom deserves better than a choice between two different flavors of tyranny. If you want any possibility of redemption, you will have to earn it through actions, not words. And it will take the rest of your life to even begin making up for what you have done." Something shifted in Kaelin's expression, a spark of something that might have been hope or might have been determination. "Teach me," he said simply. "When this is over, if I survive, teach me how to be the king this kingdom needs instead of the monster it fears. I do not ask for forgiveness because I do not deserve it, but I am asking for a chance to do better, to build something that might eventually justify my mother's sacrifice." Alara wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him it was not her job to rehabilitate a tyrant, but she thought about Darius, about the escalating horrors under his rule, about the children in that orphanage who deserved a future where they did not have to hide their education or their dreams. And she made a choice that terrified her, because it meant investing hope in something that seemed impossible. If you prove through your actions, not your promises, that you are capable of change, then yes, I will help you. But the moment you fall back into old patterns, the moment you choose fear over justice, I am done. And I will make sure everyone knows what you truly are. It was not trust, not even close, but it was the thinnest foundation for something that might eventually become cooperation. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see whether a king can truly change or whether some people are too broken by their past to ever become something better, because this story is about to test that question in ways neither of them can imagine. The week passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Kaelin's strength returned with supernatural speed, the alpha healing finally overwhelming the last traces of poison. He drilled with Theron and the loyal soldiers, rebuilding his combat edge, while Alara coordinated the logistics of moving 200 fighters into position around the palace without detection. They recruited help from unexpected sources, servants and guards who had chafed under Darius's increasingly erratic rule, common folk who remembered that Kaelin's brutality at least followed rules while Darius's cruelty was random and capricious. Alara found herself working alongside the king more than she intended, their planning sessions extending into the night as they accounted for every possible contingency. She noticed things about him that complicated her hatred further. The way he remembered names and details about even the lowest-ranked soldiers. The way he took responsibility for failures without deflecting blame. The way he listened. When she challenged his assumptions. Actually adjusting strategies based on her input rather than dismissing her because she was Omega, or because she openly despised him. The mate bond hummed between them constantly now. An awareness that could not be ignored no matter how much Alara wanted to reject it. She felt his pain when his wounds ached, sensed his determination and his fear in equal measure, experienced flashes of his thoughts when their guards were down. It was invasive and unwelcome, this intimacy she had never asked for, and yet she could not deny that it was also giving her insight into a man far more complicated than the simple monster she had believed him to be. Kaelin never pushed the bond, never used it to manipulate or to demand anything from her. If anything, he seemed as uncomfortable with it as she was. This unwanted connection between a tyrant and the woman who wanted him held accountable for his crimes. But it was there, undeniable and growing stronger. And both of them knew that eventually they would have to address what it meant beyond their temporary alliance. The night before the infiltration, Alara was checking medical supplies when Kaelin found her in the storage room. They stood in silence for a moment before he spoke. "Tomorrow, there is a good chance I will die. Darius has the entire royal guard, mages, and the backing of most of the nobility. Even with surprise on our side, the odds are not favorable. If that happens, if I fall, I need you to. Promise me something. Do not let this kingdom tear itself apart in the aftermath. Use whatever influence you have. Work with Theron and the loyal houses, and build something better than what I created. You have the vision I never did. You understand that strength is not the same as cruelty, that leadership is not the same as domination. Promise me you will not let my failures be the kingdom's legacy." Alara studied him. This man who was both her destined mate and her greatest enemy, and saw the sincerity in his request. "You are not going to die tomorrow," she said with more confidence than she felt, "because I am not letting you off that easily. You are going to survive, take back your throne, and spend the rest of your life proving that redemption is possible even for someone who has done what you have done. And then, years from now, when you have actually earned the right to be called a good king, maybe then you will get to make peace with your legacy. Until then, you are stuck with me, making sure you do not backslide into comfortable tyranny." A ghost of a smile crossed Kaelin's features, the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him. "I suppose there are worse fates than being held accountable by someone who actually cares whether I become better." The mate bond flared between them at those words, a rush of connection that made them both inhale sharply. For a moment, the air crackled with possibility, with the pull of something neither of them wanted, but both felt with increasing intensity. Kaelin stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "I know you do not want this bond. I know you reject everything it represents. But I need you to know that I feel it too, and it is showing me who I could have been if I had made different choices. You are not just the woman fate says is my match. You are living proof that strength and compassion are not opposites, that leadership and kindness can coexist. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, I am grateful that the universe gave me a chance to meet the person I should have been trying to become all along." Alara's throat tightened with emotions she was not ready to name. She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady under her palm. "Do not romanticize this, Alpha King. I am not your redemption arc, or your second chance at innocence. I am the reckoning you have been avoiding, the consequence you thought you could outrun. If we survive tomorrow, the hard work begins, and I promise you, it will be harder than any battle you have ever fought. Now go get some sleep, because we have a throne to steal and a kingdom to save from your brother's madness." The morning of the regent's coronation arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The palace was decorated with blackthorn banners, a deliberate erasure of Stormclaw symbols that made Kaelin's jaw tighten with controlled fury. Inside the great hall, nobles from across the kingdom gathered in their finest clothes, along with ambassadors from neighboring realms, all come to witness the ascension of a new king. Darius sat on the throne that should have been his brother's, dressed in crimson robes and wearing a crown that had belonged to their father. High Counselor Marin stood beside him, her smile sharp and satisfied, while guards lined every wall in a display of military strength meant to discourage any thoughts of dissent. The ceremony began with traditional invocations and blessings, priests calling upon ancient powers to sanctify the new reign. Darius preened under the attention, his speech about bringing a new era of prosperity to the kingdom, dripping with false humility and barely concealed arrogance. He was mid-sentence, describing his vision for expanded trade and stronger defenses, when the great hall doors exploded inward with a boom that shook dust from the ancient rafters. Kaelin's Stormclaw strode through the smoke and debris, very much alive, flanked by Theron and 20 of his most loyal warriors. The hall erupted into chaos, nobles scrambling away from the sudden violence, guards moving to intercept but hesitating in confusion because the man they had been told was dead stood before them radiating authority and barely controlled fury. Kaelin's voice cut through the noise like a blade. By the ancient laws of succession and the right of royal blood, I challenge the false regent who sits upon my throne. Darius Blackthorn, you are accused of conspiracy, treason, attempted regicide, and crimes against the crown. Under the law, you have two choices: surrender to trial and face judgment for your betrayals, or face me in single combat with the throne as the prize. Choose now. Darius recovered from his shock quickly, his face twisting with rage. You should be dead. The poison, the ambush, everything was perfect. How are you still breathing? Kaelin's smile was cold as winter. You underestimated the loyalty of people who believe in something more than their own ambition. And you definitely underestimated her. He gestured to where Ilara emerged from the crowd, her presence drawing gasps because Omegas were not permitted in coronation ceremonies. She saved my life when your poison should have killed me. Now answer my challenge, or be branded a coward in front of every noble and ambassador in this hall. The trap was perfect, because Darius could not refuse without losing all credibility. If he surrendered, he admitted guilt. If he fled, he proved himself unworthy of the throne. His only option was to fight, and hope his younger, unmarked body could defeat a brother still recovering from near-fatal poisoning. Darius rose from the throne, shedding his ceremonial robes to reveal armor underneath. He had planned for this possibility, or something like it, and came prepared. I accept your challenge, brother, and when I kill you this time, I will make sure there is no healer left alive to save you again. He shifted into his wolf form, a massive, black beast with red eyes, channeling dark magic that made several nobles gasp in horror because such power was forbidden in the kingdom, corrupting and dangerous. Kaelin shifted in response, his own wolf form silver and scarred, larger than Darius but clearly showing the effects of his recent ordeal. The two alphas circled each other in the cleared space of the great hall, while everyone else pressed back against the walls, knowing that what was about to happen would be brutal beyond words. The sea fight was savage and without mercy. Darius fought with the desperation of a man who knew defeat meant death, using every dirty trick and forbidden technique he had learned from the dark mages he had hired. He was faster than Kaelin, less injured, and fighting with the enhanced strength the corruption magic provided. But Kaelin had something Darius lacked: experience surviving when survival should have been impossible. The skill that came from years of defending his throne against challengers, and most importantly, a reason to win beyond simple ambition. He fought for the possibility of redemption, for the chance to become something better than what he had been, for the Omega healer watching from the crowd whose belief in his potential for change was the first real hope he had felt in years. The battle raged across the great hall, both wolves crashing through decorations and furniture, their blood staining the marble floor. Darius landed a devastating blow that tore open Kaelin's shoulder, then another that cracked ribs. For a moment, it looked like the false regent would win, like the story would end with the tyrant dying and being replaced by something infinitely worse. If you are on the edge of your seat right now, Make sure you like and comment, because what happens next will determine not just who sits on the throne, but what kind of kingdom will emerge from the ashes of this battle. Ilara watched the fight with her heart in her throat, the mate bond screaming at her, to intervene, to help, to do something besides stand helplessly while her destined partner was torn apart by his own brother. She felt every wound Kaelin took as if it was her own, the bond translating his pain directly into her awareness. Around her she saw nobles beginning to whisper, calculating which side to support based on who seemed likely to win. She saw servants and lower-ranked wolves watching with desperate hope, because they remembered that Darius's rule had been a nightmare while Kaelin's had at least been predictable, and she saw Theron and the loyal soldiers tensing, preparing to intervene if it looked like their king would fall, even though doing so would invalidate the challenge and make Kaelin's claim illegitimate. She made a choice in that moment, not to fight for him because he needed to win this himself to have any authority afterward, but to give him something he had never had before. She pushed through the crowd until she was visible at the front, then called out in a voice that carried across the hall. "Kaelin's Stormclaw, remember what you promised. You do not get to die until you have earned the right to be called a good king. Now get up and show everyone that you are capable of being more than the monster they fear." The words hit Kaelin like a physical blow, cutting through the pain and exhaustion. He had been fighting to survive, to reclaim what was his, but her voice reminded him that survival was not enough. He needed to win, not just the battle, but the right to a second chance, the opportunity to prove that change was possible even for someone as broken as he had become. He dragged himself to his feet, blood dripping from a dozen wounds, and felt something shift inside him. The rage that had always fueled his strength, the cold fury that had sustained him through years of maintaining power through fear, suddenly seemed hollow compared to the fire Ilara had ignited with her challenge. He wanted to be worthy of her belief in him, wanted to prove that her faith was not misplaced, wanted to become the king she saw hidden beneath the monster. That desire gave him strength that rage never could. He launched himself at Darius with renewed ferocity, fighting not to kill but to subdue, to overcome, to prove that he was still the stronger alpha despite everything his brother had done to weaken him. The tide turned as Kaelin adapted his strategy, using technique and experience to compensate for his injuries, targeting weak points and exploiting Darius's growing desperation. The final moments came suddenly. Darius overcommitted to a killing strike, putting everything into one massive assault, and Kaelin sidestepped at the last instant, letting momentum carry his brother past him before striking with surgical precision at the vulnerable juncture of neck and shoulder. Darius went down hard, his wolf form flickering back to human as he lost control of his shift. Kaelin stood over him, teeth bared, one paw on his brother's throat, in a position of absolute dominance. The old Kaelin would have ended it there, would have torn his brother's throat out as an example to anyone else who might consider betrayal. The entire hall held its breath, waiting for the familiar brutality, for the tyrant to reassert himself through overwhelming violence. But Kaelin looked up, his eyes finding Ilara in the crowd, and saw her watching him with an expression that said everything. This was the first test. This moment would define whether his talk of redemption was sincere or just another manipulation. He shifted back to human form, blood streaming from his wounds, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Darius Blackthorn, by right of challenge I have defeated you. Under the old laws, your life is mine to take, but I choose a different path. You will stand trial for your crimes, face judgment from a council of nobles and common folk alike, and answer for every life lost under your brief reign. If found guilty, you will spend your remaining days in exile where you can harm no one else. I will not perpetuate the cycle of bloodshed that has defined our family for too long. The kingdom has had enough of kings who rule through fear and death." The shocked silence that followed was deafening. High Counselor Marin tried to flee, but was caught by Theron's soldiers before she reached the door. Other conspirators were identified and detained as the loyal guards moved swiftly to secure the hall. Darius, broken and defeated, stared up at his brother with confusion and something that might have been grudging respect. "You have changed," he said quietly. "The old you would have killed me slowly, Kaelin nodded. I had a good teacher. She taught me that true strength is not found in how much fear you can inspire, but in how much hope you can create. Now get him out of my sight before I reconsider mercy. As guards dragged Darius away, Kaelin turned to face the assembled nobles, diplomats, and common folk who had witnessed everything. He was still bleeding, still clearly in pain, but his voice carried authority and something new, vulnerability. I stand before you as your king, returned from attempted murder by those I trusted. But I do not ask you to accept my rule simply because I won this challenge. I know what I have been. I know the suffering my reign has caused. I know that many of you have every reason to hate and fear me. I am offering you something different now, not a perfect king, because I am too scarred and too complicit in past horrors for that, but a king willing to learn, to change, to build a realm where justice means more than punishment, and strength means more than domination. It will take time. It will require accountability, and it will demand that I earn your trust through actions, rather than commanding it through fear. Those of you who wish to leave my service or my kingdom, I will not stop you. But those who choose to stay, I promise you this, I will spend the rest of my life trying to become worthy of the second chance I have been given. The response was not immediate acceptance or unified support. There were murmurs of skepticism, whispers of doubt, nobles who would clearly need more than words to believe in transformation. But there were also voices calling out support. Common folk who had seen the difference between Kaelin's brutal order and Darius's chaotic cruelty, and chose the devil they knew could potentially be reformed. Theron stepped forward and knelt, pledging his continued loyalty, and slowly others followed. Not everyone, not even a majority at first, but enough. Enough to give Kaelin a foundation on which to build something new. Ilara watched it all from her position in the crowd, emotions warring within her. She had helped save the man who killed her parents. She had given hope to a tyrant when part of her still believed he deserved only judgment. But she had also seen genuine potential for change, had felt through the mate bond that his words were sincere, that his commitment to becoming better was real, even if the path ahead was impossibly difficult. When Kaelin's eyes found hers across the hall, the question in them was clear. Had he passed the first test? Was mercy instead of vengeance enough to begin earning redemption? She did not smile, did not offer easy absolution, but she gave a single small nod. It was a start, only a start. But perhaps against all odds, it was enough to build on. The weeks following Kaelin's return to power were the most challenging of his reign. He had to simultaneously restore order, root out remaining conspirators, and begin the impossible task of reforming laws that had been in place for over a decade. True to his word, Darius and the other traitors faced trial before a council that included nobles, military leaders, and for the first time in the kingdom's history, representatives from the Omega and common populations. The trials were public and transparent, with evidence presented, methodically, and defendants given opportunity to speak in their own defense. It was a radical departure from Kaelin's previous approach of swift punishment without appeal. Darius was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to permanent exile in a remote territory where he could live out his days stripped of title and power. Marin and several other conspirators faced harsher sentences, including life imprisonment for their roles in orchestrating the coup and the deaths that followed. Every decision was documented and explained, creating precedent for a justice system based on evidence and proportionality rather than royal decree. Subscribe to this channel if you want to follow the rest of this transformation, because reforming a kingdom built on fear is going to test Kaelin and Ilara in ways neither of them can anticipate, and the hardest challenges are still ahead. Ilara threw herself into the work of systemic reform with fierce dedication. Kaelin appointed her as royal advisor for Omega Affairs, a newly created position that gave her authority to investigate abuses and propose policy changes. She started by documenting the scope of injustice under the previous regime, interviewing hundreds of Omegas about their experiences, cataloging wrongful imprisonments, excessive punishments, and systemic discrimination. The report she compiled was devastating, a comprehensive record of suffering that made even the nobles who benefited from the old system uncomfortable. Kaelin read every page, forcing himself to confront the full impact of his choices. And when she presented it to him in a private meeting, he looked physically ill. "I knew it was bad," he said quietly. "But seeing it all laid out like this, understanding the cumulative weight of fear and injustice I created, it is worse than I imagined. How do we even begin to address this?" Ilara's response was unflinching. "We start by acknowledging that quick fixes do not exist. Then we dismantle the worst laws, release those unjustly imprisoned, create oversight systems to prevent future abuses, and invest resources into education and support for Omega communities. It will take decades. You will die long before the work is complete. But if you truly commit to it, if you make it the central mission of your reign, rather than a side project to make yourself feel better, then maybe, eventually, this kingdom can become a place where Omegas do not have to hide their children or their dreams. They work together, daily, their relationship complicated by proximity, shared purpose, and the mate bond neither of them had accepted, but could no longer deny. Kaelin was different in these private working sessions, stripped of the royal authority he projected in public, willing to admit ignorance and ask questions without ego. Ilara found herself grudgingly respecting his commitment to learning, his willingness to be challenged, his genuine horror when she explained how specific laws he had signed translated into suffering on the ground. The attraction between them grew despite her resistance, fueled by seeing him choose difficulty over easy answers, watching him defend their reform proposals against resistant nobles even when it cost him political capital. She still had not forgiven him for past crimes, reminded herself daily of the parents she had lost and the brother still missing, but she could no longer deny that he was changing, that the man working beside her was becoming something different from the monster she had known only from a distance. One evening, after a particularly brutal council session where several lords had openly challenged Kaelin's authority, she found him alone in the royal library looking defeated. "They voted against the education reforms," he said, without preamble. Said allowing Omegas full access to schooling would disrupt social order and create expectations we cannot meet. I could force it through by royal decree, but Theron advised that would only create resentment and undermine support for other changes. I am trying to lead instead of command, but it feels like taking one step forward and 3 steps sideways. Ilara sat down across from him. Welcome to the reality of actual governance instead of tyranny. Change is slow, messy, and frustrating because you have to bring people with you instead of just intimidating them into compliance. The fact that you are struggling with this means you are doing it right. The old you would have executed those lords and implemented the reforms without consultation. The fact that you are listening to advisors and working within systemic constraints, even when it is harder, that is growth. Keep pushing. Eventually, the momentum will shift. Kaelin looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch. How do you have any faith left in anything after what you have survived? I destroyed your family, forced you to live in fear, created a world where your very existence as an educated Omega was, dangerous. Yet here you are, working to build something better instead of watching me fail. Why? Ilara considered her answer carefully. Because I learned that hatred, while justified, does not create the future I want to see. I could spend my life seeking revenge against you personally, and maybe I would even succeed. But that would not bring back my parents, or free my brother, or help the next generation of Omegas grow up in a world less broken than the one I inherited. You are a tool, Kaelin. Oh. Tool I am choosing to use to build something better. Do not mistake my pragmatism for forgiveness. You are still the man who signed my father's death warrant, but you are also potentially the man who can sign reforms that will prevent other daughters from losing their fathers to unjust laws. So I work with you not because I have forgotten what you did, but because I refuse to let your past crimes be the only thing that defines our kingdom's future. The honesty between them had become brutal and necessary, neither of them capable of polite fiction given everything they had been through. Kaelin moved closer, his voice dropping to something raw and vulnerable. The mate bond is killing me. I feel your pain, your determination, your barely controlled fury at having to work with me. And underneath it all, I feel something else. Possibility. The ghost of what we could become if circumstances were different. I know you reject the bond. I know you see it as one more cruelty fate inflicted on you. But I need you to understand that it is showing me who I could have been all along if I had made different choices. You are not just the woman destiny says is mine. You are the person I wish I had become. Strong without brutality, compassionate without weakness, willing to fight for justice instead of settling for order. I am not asking you to accept the bond or to forgive what I have done. I am just asking you to know that you have changed me in ways I cannot fully articulate, and whether or not we ever become anything more than reluctant allies, I am grateful for every moment you have chosen to believe I could be better. The vulnerability in his words pierced through Alara's defenses more effectively than any grand gesture could have. She felt the truth of them through the bond, felt his sincerity and his fear and his desperate hope that redemption might actually be possible. Against her better judgment, against the voice in her head screaming that this was the man who destroyed her family, she reached out and took his hand. I do not know if I can ever fully forgive you. The wounds are too deep, the losses too permanent. But I can see that you are trying, genuinely trying, to become someone worthy of a second chance. So here is what I will offer. I will continue working with you to reform this kingdom. I will use the mate bond to keep you honest, to call you out when you backslide into old patterns, to push you toward the leader you say you want to become. And maybe, years from now, if you actually manage to build something good from the ashes of your tyranny, we can revisit what this bond means and whether it can become something other than a cosmic joke. But Kaelin, she squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. If you betray this trust, if you fall back into comfortable cruelty, if you prove that this is all performance and no substance, I will end you myself. Mate bond or not, redemption is earned through sustained action, not promised through pretty words. Understood? Kaelin nodded, his grip on her hand gentle despite his strength. Understood. Hold me accountable. I need that more than I need easy forgiveness. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Kaelin leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers in the traditional gesture of trust between mates. The bond flared like wildfire, and for the first time Alara did not fight it. She let it flow through her, let herself feel the connection that had been pulling at them since the moment she first touched him, while he lay poisoned and dying. It was overwhelming and intimate and terrifying, this joining of souls that saw past every defense and pretense to the raw truth beneath. She felt his guilt like a physical weight, the genuine horror he experienced when confronting the full scope of his past actions. She felt his determination to be better, fragile but real. And beneath it all, she felt something that shocked her more than anything else. She felt her own cautious, guarded hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken tyrant and this traumatized healer might actually build something worth believing in. The kiss that followed was inevitable and world-changing, a claiming and a promise and a declaration all at once. It was not gentle or romantic in any traditional sense. It was fierce and desperate and honest. Two people who had been fighting fate finally surrendering to the possibility that destiny might have actually gotten something right, despite all the pain that led them here. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the bond between them had solidified into something unbreakable. Alara could feel Kaelin's heartbeat as clearly as her own, could sense his emotions as vividly as if they were hers. The intimacy of it should have been invasive, but instead it felt like coming home to a place she had never known she was missing. This changes everything, Kaelin said quietly. And nothing, Alara responded. We still have a kingdom to reform, and a past to reconcile, and years of hard work ahead. But yes, this changes things. She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. I am choosing you, Kaelin, not because fate says we are mates, but because I have seen you fight to become better, and I believe that fight is genuine. But know this, I am not choosing the king who kills to maintain order. I am choosing the man who spared his brother when vengeance would have been easier. Do not make me regret this choice by proving that mercy was a one-time performance instead of a fundamental shift. The reforms accelerated after that night, as if their acceptance of the mate bond had unlocked new possibilities for cooperation and shared vision. Together, they systematically dismantled the most oppressive laws, starting with the prohibition on Omega education and working outward to address issues of property rights, legal representation, and protection from arbitrary punishment. Each change faced resistance from nobles who benefited from the old system, and each battle required Kaelin to use every ounce of political skill he possessed to build coalitions and overcome opposition without resorting to the intimidation tactics he had relied on in the past. Alara became his conscience and his strategist, helping him navigate the complex social dynamics of reform while pushing him to move faster and further than was comfortable. She was ruthless in her advocacy, willing to call him out publicly when she thought he was being too cautious, forcing him to choose between his desire for her approval and his instinct to maintain stability through gradualism. The tension made their relationship electric, a constant negotiation between her idealism and his pragmatism, her demands for justice and his calculations about what was politically possible. 6 months into the reform era, they made the discovery that would transform not just their relationship, but the future of the entire kingdom. Ilara had been researching her family's history, trying to find information about her missing brother, when she uncovered records hidden in the royal archives. Her mother's bloodline traced back to the ancient line of Omega mystics who had once served as advisors to kings before the purges began 3 generations ago. More than that, her grandmother had been a moonweaver, one of the rare Omegas born with the ability to channel lunar magic, powerful enough to bless or curse entire territories. The ability was thought extinct, wiped out when Kaelin's grandfather had ordered the execution of all known magic users to consolidate power in the Alpha bloodlines. But Alara carried the dormant gift in her blood, awakened by the mate bond with an Alpha king and amplified by the traumatic circumstances of their meeting. The ancient texts described moonweavers as agents of balance, capable of breaking curses and healing corruption, but only when bonded with an Alpha who had proven himself through sacrifice and genuine change. The implications were staggering. If Alara could access her full power, she could potentially break the generational curses that had plagued certain territories, heal the corrupted magic that Darius had unleashed, and most importantly, establish a new model of leadership where Alphas and Omegas governed as equals rather than dominators and subordinates. But doing so required completing a ritual that would bind her fate to Kaelin's permanently, linking their lives and their powers in ways that could never be undone. If he fell back into tyranny, her power would corrupt with his. If she rejected the bond fully, his ability to lead would wither. They would succeed together or fail together with no middle ground. Alara presented her findings to Kaelin in the same library where they had first kissed, laying out ancient texts and genealogical records across the table. "This is why fate made us mates," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Not randomly, not cruelly, but because the kingdom needs what we can become together. A partnership between Alpha strength and Omega wisdom, between military power and healing magic, between the old order and a new vision. But it only works if you are truly committed to change. If there is any part of you that wants to return to ruling through fear, we cannot complete this ritual. It would destroy us both and poison the magic at its source. You have to decide, right here, right now, whether you are all in on building a new kind of kingdom, or whether you are just playing at reform until it becomes inconvenient." Kaelin studied the texts, the weight of the decision visible in every line of his body. He was quiet for a long time before speaking. "Every instinct I developed over 12 years of ruling tells me this is dangerous. Tying my power to someone else's, making myself vulnerable in ways I spent my entire reign avoiding. Surrendering control to a shared destiny instead of maintaining absolute authority. The old me would refuse, would see this as weakness, would walk away rather than risk the loss of power. But that version of me created a kingdom of fear, where parents died for teaching their children, and Omegas lived as second-class citizens. So I am going to trust the person I am trying to become, instead of the monster I was. Yes, I commit fully to building a new kingdom with you as my partner. Not my subject. I choose vulnerability over control, shared power over dominance, and the possibility of something transformative over the comfort of familiar tyranny. Complete the ritual. Bind us together. And if I ever betray that commitment, let the magic itself hold me accountable. The moon-weaving ritual took place during the next full moon in the ancient temple beneath the palace, a structure so old that most people had forgotten it existed. Alara and Kaelin performed the ceremony alone, following instructions from texts that had survived only because someone had hidden them from the purges. The ritual required them to speak truths they had never voiced, to acknowledge wounds they had inflicted and received, to commit to a shared future, despite the impossibility of forgetting the past. Kaelin knelt before Alara and recited the litany of his crimes, naming every unjust death he could remember, every life destroyed by laws he had signed, every moment he had chosen fear over mercy. It took hours, his voice breaking, repeatedly, as he forced himself to confront the full scope of his failures. Alara witnessed his confession, with tears streaming down her face, the mate bond translating his genuine remorse directly into her awareness, making it impossible to doubt his sincerity, even when her scars screamed that he did not deserve forgiveness. Then it was her turn. She spoke of her pain, her losses, the years of fear and rage and helpless hatred. She acknowledged the grudging respect she had developed for his efforts to change, the cautious hope she felt when she watched him choose difficulty over expediency, the terrifying vulnerability of allowing herself to believe in redemption. She confessed that somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing him as only a monster and started seeing him as a man fighting demons both external and internal, and that recognizing his humanity had complicated her grief in ways she was still processing. When the words were exhausted and the emotional excavation complete, they placed their hands together on the ancient moonstone at the center of the temple and spoke the final binding. Power erupted from the stone, silver light that wrapped around them like liquid starlight, pouring into their joined hands and spreading through their bodies. The mate bond, which had always been present but held at a distance, suddenly completed fully, snapping into place with an intensity that dropped them both to their knees. Alara gasped as magic she had never accessed flooded her awareness, centuries of Omega wisdom and power awakening in response to the bond with an Alpha who had proven himself through genuine change. Kaelin felt his own power transform, the brutal strength he had always relied on refining into something more controlled and purposeful, leadership that inspired rather than intimidated, authority earned through trust rather than commanded through fear. When the light finally faded and they could see clearly again, everything had changed. The bond between them was no longer something to be managed or resisted. It was fundamental, unbreakable, a joining of souls that made them stronger together than either could ever be alone. Alara could feel Kaelin's presence in her mind like a constant warm light, reassuring and challenging in equal measure. Kaelin experienced her strength and compassion as a North Star, guiding him away from old patterns, making it impossible to hide behind comfortable rationalizations when temptation pulled him toward familiar tyranny. They stood together in the ancient temple, forever changed, and knew without speaking that they had just become something unprecedented in the kingdom's history. Not just mates, not just partners, but the foundation of a new way of governing that could transform everything if they had the courage to see it through. And if you have stayed with this story through all its complexity and pain and hope, please take a moment to comment about what you think should happen next, because Alara and Kaelin's journey is far from over, and the kingdom they are trying to build will face challenges that will test whether love and commitment are enough to overcome generations of trauma and injustice. The next 5 years were the hardest and most transformative of both their lives. With Alara's Moonweaver powers fully awakened, and Kaelin's authority redirected toward partnership rather than dominance, they systematically rebuilt the kingdom's governmental and social structures. They established a grand council that included equal representation from alphas, betas, and omegas, stripping away the exclusive alpha control that had defined governance for generations. They created an independent judiciary to handle disputes and crimes, removing the king's absolute authority to punish at whim. They invested heavily in education, building schools in every territory, and mandating that all children, regardless of designation, receive comprehensive instruction. Each reform faced fierce resistance from nobles who saw their privileges eroding, requiring constant negotiation, strategic compromises, and occasional displays of power to remind opponents that reform did not mean weakness. Alara used her magic to heal territories corrupted by dark practices, traveling the kingdom with a rotating security detail, and demonstrating that Omega power could be as formidable as any Alpha's strength. She became a symbol of transformation, living proof that the old hierarchies were arbitrary rather than natural. Kaelin accompanied her on many of these journeys, presenting a united front and showing skeptical citizens that their king had genuinely changed. He was not perfect, never would be perfect given the weight of his past actions, but he was consistent in choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. When old instincts urged him toward convenient brutality, Alara felt it through the bond and called him back to the principles they had committed to. When she pushed too hard too fast and risked alienating allies they needed for long-term success, Kaelin counseled patience and strategic thinking. They balanced each other, challenged each other, and slowly, incrementally, built something neither could have achieved alone. The discovery of Alara's brother came in the 3rd year of reform. He had survived the labor camps, barely, and was found during a mass review of prisoners that Alara had insisted upon. The reunion was bittersweet, joy at finding him alive, tempered by horror at what he had endured and rage at the system that had stolen years of his life. Kaelin met with him privately, offering no excuses or justifications for the imprisonment, simply acknowledging his responsibility and asking what he could do to support the healing process. It was not enough, could never be enough, but it was honest. Alara's brother, Marcus, was skeptical of the king's transformation, but gradually came to accept that the changes were real when he saw the new laws being implemented and felt the shift in how Omegas were treated throughout the kingdom. He became an advocate for justice reform, working specifically with former prisoners to help them reintegrate into society and ensure their experiences informed policy changes. His presence was a constant reminder of the human cost of Kaelin's past choices, preventing anyone from forgetting that redemption required ongoing accountability, rather than claiming a single dramatic change erased years of harm. The 4th year, Alara and Kaelin stood before the Grand Council and did something unprecedented. They voluntarily limited the monarchy's powers, enshrining in law that future kings and queens could not act without council approval on matters of war, taxation, or justice. They created mechanisms for removing a monarch who abused power, taking away the absolute authority that had allowed tyranny to flourish. Many advisors warned that weakening the crown was dangerous, that future challenges would exploit these constraints. But both of them knew that sustainable change required preventing future leaders from undoing their work with a stroke of a pen. They chose to trust in systems and institutions, rather than hoping each successive ruler would be wise and just. It was a calculated risk, trading absolute power for the possibility of something more enduring. The day the reforms were signed into law, Alara and Kaelin walked through the capital together, not as king and subject, but as partners. Citizens who had once fled from Kaelin's presence now approached tentatively. Some still fearful, but others willing to voice concerns or share hopes directly rather than through fearful whispers. It was not universal acceptance, never would be after everything that had happened, but it was progress measurable in small moments of trust gradually extended. That night, in the privacy of their chambers, Alara turned to Kaelin with tears in her eyes. "I never thought this was possible. When I was healing you in that mountain stronghold, hating you with everything in me, I could not have imagined we would end up here, building something real together, actually believing we might leave the kingdom better than we found it. There are still days when I see you and remember the man who signed my father's death warrant, when the weight of that history feels like it might crush me. But there are also days when I look at you and see the king we need, the partner I chose, the person who fought his own demons to become someone worthy of a second chance. I do not know if that makes me weak or wise. I just know I am glad I chose to believe in redemption, even when it seemed impossible. Kaylin pulled her close, the bond between them humming with shared emotion. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You survived my worst reign, saved my life when you had every reason to let me die, and then demanded I become better instead of settling for merely surviving. Everything good I have accomplished in these past 5 years exists because you refused to let me hide behind comfortable excuses. I know I do not deserve you. I know the scales will never truly balance after what I did. But I promise you this. I will spend every remaining day of my life trying to be worthy of the faith you placed in me when no one else would. Our kingdom is not perfect. We still have so much work to do. But it is becoming a place where people like your father might actually survive. Where Omegas can dream without fear. Where justice means more than the whim of whoever holds power. That is because of you. Because you saw possibility in a monster and demanded he become a man. Their first child was born in the 6th year of the new era, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's determination. They named her Lyra, after Alara's mother, a gesture of remembrance and hope intertwined. Her birth was celebrated throughout the kingdom because she represented something unprecedented, the child of an Alpha King and an Omega Moonweaver, born into a world actively being transformed into something better. She would grow up never knowing the fear that had defined her mother's childhood, never witnessing executions in the square, or learning to hide her gifts to survive. Alara held her daughter and wept with gratitude and grief, grateful that Lyra would have the freedom she had been denied, grieving that her own parents could not witness this miracle. Kaylin touched his daughter's tiny hand with overwhelming gentleness, and made a silent vow that he would never become the kind of king who made children afraid. The cycle of trauma and violence ended here, with this child who would inherit a kingdom committed to justice rather than fear. The years continued to pass, each one building on the foundation they had established. The kingdom was not perfect. There were still inequalities to address, still nobles who resented the changes, still scars from the past that would take generations to fully heal. But the trajectory was clear. Omega literacy rates climbed year after year. Independent courts handled an increasing share of disputes without royal interference. The Grand Council grew more confident in challenging proposals they deemed unjust, and Kaylin supported their authority even when it frustrated his plans. Ilara trained other Moonweavers as they emerged, Omegas discovering their own magical heritage and learning to wield power that had been suppressed for generations. Together they created a society where strength came in many forms, and leadership was measured by service rather than domination. 15 years after Kaylin first opened his eyes in that mountain stronghold, to find Alara standing over him with hatred and healing in equal measure, they stood together in the palace gardens, watching their 3 children play. Lyra was practicing her emerging Moonweaver abilities under her mother's supervision. Their twin sons, named for Theron and Alara's father, were arguing good-naturedly about strategy games while a patient tutor tried to keep them focused. The kingdom stretched out around them, transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible when they first met. Kaylin turned to Alara, silver threading his dark hair now, old scars and new laugh lines mapping the journey from monster to man. Do you ever regret it? Choosing to save me instead of letting me die? Think how different your life could have been if you had walked away that day. Alara considered the question seriously, as she always did, never offering easy platitudes or pretending the past was anything other than complicated. There are moments, she admitted, when I remember my parents and wish fate had given me a cleaner path to justice. But then, I look at what we have built, at the lives we have changed, at our children growing up free in ways I never was, and I know I made the right choice. Not because you deserved saving, Kaylin. You did not. But because the kingdom deserved a chance at something better, and you were the tool available to build it. The fact that you became someone I could love along the way, that our partnership became real instead of just strategic, that is a gift I never expected and will never take for granted. Kaylin kissed her forehead. the gesture so familiar now, so central to who they had become together. I was thinking about my mother today, wondering what she would think of all this. She died believing I would become a good king, sacrificed herself, hoping I would have the chance to lead. I spent so many years convinced I was honoring her memory by being strong and ruthless and unbreakable. It took you to show me that real strength is vulnerability, that true leadership is service, that the best way to honor her sacrifice was to become the kind of king she actually wanted rather than the monster I thought I needed to be. If she could see us now, see what we have built together, I think she might finally be proud. Ilara leaned into him, their bond thrumming with shared contentment and hope. She would be proud. And my parents, wherever they are, I think they would understand why I chose this path, why I decided that building a better future was more important than nursing justified hatred. We have given our children what our parents wanted for us, freedom to dream, and the security to pursue those dreams without fear. That is the ultimate redemption, not erasing the past, but ensuring the key. Future is worthy of their sacrifices. As the sun set over the capital city, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Ilara and Kaelin stood together watching their kingdom settle into evening. Lights began appearing in windows across the city, families gathering for meals, children being tucked into bed with stories of hope instead of warnings about survival. It was peaceful in a way that once seemed impossible. Order maintained through justice rather than fear. Strength demonstrated through compassion rather than brutality. The transformation was not complete, might never be complete, but it was real and sustainable, built on systems and values rather than the goodwill of a single ruler. They had survived his darkest reign and her deepest losses to become the light that freed them all, proving that redemption was possible even from the depths of tyranny if people were willing to do the hard work of genuine change. The mate bond that once seemed like a cruel joke had become their greatest strength, a partnership that balanced power with wisdom, force with healing, the weight of the past with hope for the future. Together, they had rewritten what it meant to rule, what it meant to heal, what it meant to transform trauma into something beautiful and enduring. Epilogue. 25 years after the moon-weaving ritual, Queen Ilara stood in the reconstructed Grand Temple, addressing the largest gathering in the kingdom's history. King Kaelin had passed 6 months earlier, his body finally succumbing to old wounds and the accumulated cost of his transformation from tyrant to beloved leader. His death had been peaceful, surrounded by family. His final words a whispered gratitude to Ilara for seeing him when no one else could. The kingdom mourned genuinely, not because fear demanded it, but because they had witnessed his evolution and came to respect the man he had fought to become. His funeral had been attended by thousands, including many Omegas who once fled from his shadow, but came to pay respects to a king who had used his final decades to dismantle the very systems that had enabled his early tyranny. Now Ilara prepared to pass the crown to their daughter Lyra, who stood beside her radiating confidence and compassion in equal measure. The coronation would be different from any before it because it marked the formal transition to the new constitutional monarchy they had established. Lyra would be the first ruler bound from the start by the limitations and accountability mechanisms they had created, unable to wield absolute power even if she wanted to. She would govern as first among equals on the Grand Council. Her authority derived from service and consent rather than intimidation. Ilara looked out at the assembled crowd, seeing faces from every designation and territory, representatives of a kingdom that had learned to value diversity over dominance. She began her speech with words that had become the foundation of their reformed society. We are defined not by the worst things we have done, but by our commitment to doing better. My mate, your former king, began his reign as a tyrant who ruled through fear. He ended it as a leader who had earned respect through decades of consistent choosing justice over convenience, compassion over control, accountability over absolute power. His transformation was not easy or quick or complete. There were setbacks and mistakes along the way. But he never stopped trying to be better. And that persistence created space for all of us to believe in the possibility of change, she continued. her voice carrying across the vast crowd. I stand before you not as a symbol of forgiveness, but as proof that redemption requires work. It demands that we hold ourselves and our leaders accountable, that we build systems stronger than individual virtue, that we invest in healing even when it is harder than holding grudges. Kaylin and I were brought together by fate, but we chose each other through action. We chose to build instead of destroy, to trust instead of fear, to transform trauma into purpose. The kingdom you inherit today is the result of those choices multiplied across decades and supported by thousands of people who believed that something better was possible. As I pass the crown to my daughter, I challenge you all to continue that work. Perfect justice may be impossible, but meaningful progress is always within reach if we have the courage to keep reaching. Lyra stepped forward and accepted the ceremonial crown, but instead of wearing it, she held it up for all to see. This crown represents service, not dominance. It is a symbol of responsibility, not privilege. I accept it knowing that you, the people of this kingdom, have the power to take it back, if I fail to govern with wisdom and compassion. My parents taught me that leadership is earned daily through choices that uplift the vulnerable, challenge the powerful, and create space for everyone to flourish. I will not be perfect. I will make mistakes, but I promise to learn from them, to listen to voices unlike my own, and to remember that the goal is not my glory, but your freedom. Together, we will continue building a kingdom worthy of the sacrifices made by those who came before us. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Alara felt the mate bond pulse one final time, Kaylin's presence briefly vivid before fading into memory. She smiled through tears, knowing that wherever he was finally at peace. They had survived his darkest reign to become the light that freed them all, and that light would continue shining long after they were both gone, carried forward by their children and by a kingdom that had learned the hardest lesson of all. That redemption is possible, transformation is achievable, and even the worst among us can become better if we are willing to do the work and if others are brave enough to believe in that possibility. The story of the ruthless king and the Omega healer would be told for generations, not as a fairy tale, but as a testament to the power of accountability, the necessity of justice, and the transformative potential of love, combined with unwavering commitment to change. Thank you for following this journey through darkness and into light, through pain and toward hope, through impossible circumstances to unlikely redemption. If this story moved you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts and subscribe to see more tales of transformation, complex relationships, and the hard work of becoming better than we were yesterday.